With delight, I want to welcome and introduce Wayne Curtis, one of our main stage authors for this summer's Read by the Sea Literary Festival. Wayne is a New Brunswick author whose writing career has been extensive, long, and prolific. In 1988, Wayne published his first book, Currents in the Stream. In 2020, Winter Road, his most recent book, appeared with Pottersfield Press. And in between those two bookends, so to speak, of his career, Wayne has published 16 additional books, with more to come, we can be sure. Wayne's writing encompasses novels, collections of essays, short stories, poetry, screenplays, and countless articles for magazines and newspapers. He is, in the true sense of the word vocation, called through a deep commitment to be a writer. His literary interests, both fictional and non-fictional, lie primarily with rural New Brunswick, with people who live on the land, who fish, farm, pick wild blueberries, make jam, cherish their rootedness in an ancestral country home, and find simple but dignified employment in villages and towns. Enticingly, his writing is also filled with lovely sensory details that appeal to the eyes, ears, nose, touch, and taste, as he lovingly describes sun-baked fields, the scent of railway gravel, nuanced qualities of light, purple sage, the smell of wood smoke, sounds of splashing rain, the fragrance of apples, sweet-smelling hay ricks, crisp winter air, the taste of pancakes or burning leaves. Having grown up on a rural New Brunswick family farm in the region of the Miramichi River, Wayne knows that life and recounts it with integrity. But more than knowing it, he seeks to preserve it, as do some of his favorite authors, William Wordsworth, Robert Frost, Charles G.D. Roberts. Through his work, Wayne solidifies ways of life that are increasingly fragile, but still present, as he casts our minds backwards to delightful rural traditions, while revealing through his characters and their memories how the past still intertwines with the present, not to be lost. And for this courageous vision, Wayne has been recognized with numerous literary awards, including an honorary doctorate from St. Thomas University, where he completed a degree in English literature. Today, Wayne will be reading a short story from his recent book, Winter Road. Welcome, Wayne, and thank you for your contribution to this summer's Read by the Sea.
Suzanne, thank you for the introduction. The story is called Wild Blueberries. We had gone to the railway first, my mother and I, to get enough berries to make a pie. It had been a clear day, and the whole countryside was filled with promise, a church bell ringing in that faraway village. I remember my mother in a low-cut sundress under a big straw hat kneeling among the shrubs as we filled a small bucket. She praised me for being such a fast picker and for the cleanness of the berries I gathered. In the simplicity of childhood, this approval inspired me to work harder, to become known in the household as a go-getter, but more, I think, to please her, as she was sensitive to my unspoken thoughts, which of course were always favorable to her wishes, wanting to see me succeed in whatever I did. Though not a teacher by trade, she had a way of encouraging me with compliments. She once told me that sensitivity and talent were the most important virtues anyone could have, and that learning and genius were two different things, and that intellect could be gotten from books. Imagination is more important than knowledge, she said. Be true to yourself, follow your heart. Having been self-taught, though a good reader, she had a certain disdain for academia and associated it with snobbery. She had a pedigree that could not be captured on paper or worn on a sleeve. As a widowed farm woman, she walked barefoot in the river meadows, drank brook water, while scenting the blueberry bush in bloom, as she looked under the big low-branched trees for the cows that she milked daily. I remember seeing her, a dairymaid in a white linen apron. In a yoke, she carried the heavy buckets from the pasture to our milk house, which was built over the spring and where the cream separator stood. Later, as she pumped the churn's dasher in our lamplit kitchen, she sang, One Morning in May, an English folk ballad I had often heard my great-uncle play on his homemade flute. Mother's shrill color tones, inspired by her beautiful soul, her moments of melancholy that were so full of tenderness, were meant for her ears only, yet her voice reached outside the house where I listened with glee. She would never know that this small display of intimacy brought us so close together, as did the colors in my father's paintings long after he went to France to fight in World War II. Daddy was killed there in 1944 and is buried in Flanders with a little white cross marking his grave. Because I was only 3 when he went overseas, I can remember my father more from the photographs than the man himself. The wedding picture that hung on our living room wall, and above that the one of him in uniform, Private Daniel Watson of the Royal New Brunswick Regiment, North Shore. And in the future, which is the true measure of art, the way the little moments stand up in country life, I can still see Mother's black hair falling over her eyes as she made butter, then went back to the barn where on a thrashing floor she flailed the bean pods before going to where there was a wind to winter them, the chaff scattering over the stubble land. It had all been in a day's work. Beyond the gate where the tree branches and the hayricks turned to gold in the sunset, sunflowers stood with bowed heads, their long open lashes weeping, as if out of shame for my mother's plight. But she was happy in her world, and while being attractive in youth, she had a radiant smile. In old age, she claimed dignity and grace. Now, as the morning went on, Mother became quiet, as if she were lost in thought or had been set free to be with nature, unbound from the routine of farm chores. I kept silent. There among the wildberry bushes along that railway line, with its old-world charm, the hobo smells of sun-heated gravel, rust of steel and weathered telegraph poles, the only sounds were of that far-off church bell, the chirp of a sparrow, or perhaps the snap and crack of rails, a steam train approaching. I put a penny on a rail and watched as it was flattened by the big iron wheels, the train whistle echoing through those buried hills. And for a moment I wanted to become not a gatherer, not a botanist, but a railway man, those short, electrifying, short-lived dreams of youth that would never see fruition. In her spare time, my mother sometimes sketched, without pretensions, the little farm scenes with which she was so familiar. The old apple tree in blossom, the farm wagon at harvest, clothesline laden with red stockings, or a patched quilt of many colors. Sometimes she penciled her own portrait in reflection from a bedroom mirror. And she always emphasized the importance of imagination and solitude if we were to be good artists, saying that every painter is what she is painting, a painter of her own self, and that her work is merely an instrument that she presents to the viewer to help them see a part of themselves they would otherwise be indifferent to. Like a composer of classical music takes us on a journey inside ourselves. I now wish that an artist could have been with us to capture the scene that I carry inside me. Mother and child gathering berries along the railroad, because there was something captivating about the moment which had a spirit of its own. The sun shining down on my mother's flowered dress and straw hat, beneath which her hair was in a single plait, her arms sunburned, the parallel rails that extended beyond view to bigger and more exciting places. And there was the purple shade of the trees beyond the fence, the cattle bars we crawled under, the drifting white clouds of fluffy down in the unfathomable blue sky. Because these things could not be recaptured later on, save for a glimpse in my nostalgic mind, when the inspiration was triggered by the smell of wood smoke, the taste of a blueberry, or the melody of that little folk song my mother sang when she worked the churn. Back then, like the railway, my life's imaginations stretched so far into the future, I could see no end to them. It is thus today in looking back, and that nostalgia enhances the illusions of juvenile dreams. For me, from that time on, the image of mother on her knees, meditating while unconsciously putting blueberries into an overflowing tin, became frozen in time like the figures we see in school books. Old curios in a cabinet, symbols on an urn, or the plaster of Paris angels we made at vacational Sunday school. Real or imagined, they stayed with me through life. Folks said that in the autumn of her years, my mother looked like Queen Elizabeth II, hunched-shouldered in a royal blue dress, imitation pearl beads, and with a wide-brimmed hat over her steel-gray hair. And to me, she was just as dignified, though poor monetarily and having never known the fulfillment of a school graduation or an award citation. She always showed signs of grandeur. She was my queen and teacher in that she made things happen. While I knew her as majestic, like country music is invisible to city folks, the rest of the community, the Billies, knew her as a no-nonsense figure who was a deep thinker and full of emotion. With her delicate features and sensitive qualities, it was like she was better suited to a more cultivated environment, perhaps a violinist or a pianist. Having been a chambermaid in her youth, she had a taste for the finer city things in life. But of course, she would never leave the farm. On Sundays after church, on her oilcloth-covered dining room table, she set a glass pitcher of homemade lemonade around which stood a circle of crystal drinking glasses, a custom she had picked up in town. At that summertime of year, our old home, my mother's castle, was serene, the curtains having been drawn, canvas awnings cranked down, and with the cooking fires being in the adjacent shed-like summer kitchen. The place was also kept cool by the big river elms, and I can remember feeling the linoleum under my bare feet as I dressed, went down the stairs and out through a breezeway to have breakfast. There was tea brewing and the scent of bread baking in the oven of the wood range. Smells that mixed with the radio's country songs while I ate my sugarless porridge. And later, no matter where I traveled or the place I owned, I could never find the same atmosphere or the grandeur and respect that my mother demanded in that old gray shingle farmhouse with its busied wall sketches, plank kitchen's table, and the hand-hewn whitewashed beams. It was like the first reaction I got as a child from a fairy tale or a nursery rhyme, in that along the way it could never be recaptured, not with the same nuance and passion as of old. These childhood metaphors still take me back to those summer mornings that were all too short-lived. By the railway line, filling a tin dipper with blueberries, one by one, seemed like a lifetime of minor events, a sequence of moments that would eventually lead to a whole, the illusions of what life would be if I listened to my mother, kept focused, worked hard to fulfill my youthful dreams. Or later in the purchase of something with the money earned, which was always less gratifying than the dream had been, the togetherness we shared in making it happen, so that the memories of the outing, be they weeks apart, gelled into one major symbol that was unconsciously set down for posterity. I can still see and feel it from both sides, the image of mother on her knees in the fields with one on top of her hat to keep breeze from blowing it away, when she looked like a peasant woman we might see in a classical painting or in a winter kitchen, or in our winter kitchen with the over-lighted birthday cake she decorated for me when I turned 18, and her tears and sentimental goodbyes that followed. By that time, the idea of spending a summer morning picking blueberries had become a boring and geniusly time-wasting occupation, an out-of-date custom. For once you outgrow a thing, you can never go back to it literally and expect the same emotions to be waiting there. Indeed, when a person has reached adolescence and beyond, he will seldom remain a hostage to his boyhood or his mother. He wants to be in the city where less tedious, more exciting things are happening in a bigger measure. By this time, too, my taste in things, and indeed my dreams as well, had changed to something more sophisticated. And I often wondered as to the depth of my mother's longings, if they had ever been outgrown, as she appeared so happy on the farm. In the blueberry fields, the fulfillments of the great harvest, the little buried steps toward maturity, plus the excitement I had imagined to be on the far end of that lonesome railway line, also a disappointment later on, became something I could never go back to, not with the same gradation as of old. And how at times I longed for that kind of stamina, that kind of eagerness, that kind of contentment to return, if only in some small measure. Until one day, January the 14th, 2001, when the winter rains were coming down and there was a threat of snow in the wind. Getting word that my mother was terminally ill, I left Sherbrooke on an eastbound train, absorbing the woodlands along the buried tracks. She was still pictured there, arriving home well after midnight to be with her at the time of her death. After being away this time for just 6 months, I went to her bedside in what had, through the years, become a dilapidated and dispirited farmhouse. My old home, her castle. In her over-decorated and medicine-smelling bedroom, I held her frail hands, spoke to her in the old home jargon. But she was not responding to my words. Instead, she was pinching me with a bone-crushing grip and whispering, "Oh, Dan, you have come home, at last to be with me as you promised so long ago. Oh, Dan, I always knew you were alive and that you would come home someday. Dan, please help me get me through this awful pain." It was as if she were still a young woman and I, Dan, had a remedy for her suffering. And shortly the nurse arrived and gave her a needle filled with morphine. In her state of delirium, she had taken me for my father, and I grieved to think that she did not remember me, her own son, rather Daddy, who left so long before I did, and that his leaving had impacted her so much more. As I said, the most important things in life stand up the longest. But the pain in her eyes made me realize that her indifference toward me was not personal, but the result of much greater sorrow in earlier times. She had never been one to go to the cenotaph and cry on Remembrance Day, and was bashful when she had to sit in the front pew in a church. She had kept it all hidden, as country women will. I did not attempt to tell her I was Jim, thinking it was more important for her to be with her true love now, just a man whose brown eyes I had inherited. But her hands were locked in a firm grip, and she was staring into my eyes with lips clear blue, staring into my eyes with those clear blue eyes of hers that were now glassed over from the pain and medication, until her breathing changed and there was a great rattle in her throat. Her grip strengthened and then relaxed, and I could feel the spirit and the great soul leave her broken and demented body, and she was gone physically from this world. Not until I reached the frailty of old age, once a man, twice a boy, after the railway bed had been turned into a bicycle trail, life was gone from those fields that would never be planted again, and the farmhouse had been devoured by the prospects of industrialization. Could I see it clearly? As Anton Chekhov wrote, every idea materializes gradually in its own time. In life, as in art, distance is the true qualifier. Now in my longing to go back to the old home place, if only metaphorically, I try to relate a hot summer morning, the taste of a wild blueberry, or the lyrics of an old country song to my youth. But I find that in going over those fallow lands with a fine-toothed comb, the strongest images are of Mother, not from her deathbed exactly, not from an old wedding photograph, but from the blueberry fields. A living monument on her knees, dressed the way she was in a straw hat and sundress, the smiling blueberry-colored eyes, the sun beaming down on her as if from heaven. Thank you.
Wayne, thank you for your reading of the lovely story, Wild Blueberries. All of the short stories in this collection are set in rural New Brunswick, and they deal with an old way of life that has vanished, as you state in the opening piece. And as we have just heard, why have you chosen the subject of rural life and its vanishing traditions? And what has prepared you to deal with that material so richly and authentically as a dignified and fulfilling way of life? Was it a lived experience for you?
Well, Suzanne, I grew up on a farm just after this Second World War. And so it comes natural to me to write about the old farm life. I always read literature like Robert Frost, which was a farm poet, and other farm writers like Sinclair Ross, which was a mentor of mine years ago. And I read the Russian writers, the old Russian writers, and so I'm in that groove, and I think I'm the only one writing from that point of view in the country. And so I stay there, and I write from there, and I think when people pick up my books now, they expect the farm scene and in the old days. So I stay there to be different.
Thank you, Wayne. That's a lovely response, and I admire your courage in preserving those old traditions, both through your reading and through your writing. In a related way, most of your stories deal with memory, which has a prominent place in the characters' minds. The first-person narrators, especially, live in the present, but they tie almost every moment that unfolds to recollected events from the past. Is memory, in your view, an integral aspect of human experience? Is it also a dangerous pastime, as you admit, in the sense that it risks idealized nostalgia, as some of the narrators self-consciously acknowledge?
That is a danger because I know that nostalgia enhances the illusions of juvenile dreams, as I said in the story. But I, I write from, I start a story off with some little event that happened. Like I remember picking blueberries with my mother just once, and that was enough to get me going in that. And once I get in that age bracket, in that time, I stay there. And when I start a story, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to end. So you always think better when you're writing. So I worked through it, and I've come up with that ending there about mother dying, and my father was never overseas. A lot of people relate my writing to nonfiction. And I've had people ask me, creative nonfiction, and how do you do it? Well, I never had a writing course, a creative writing course. So I just write. Alistair MacLeod told me one time, he said, write like you were writing a letter home to your mother. And explain things. And that's a lesson I took from Alistair. And so that's the way I write. I know that fiction gives you a lot more room. You can create things. You don't have to stick to the facts. So, I write fiction. It's all fiction, although it sounds like nonfiction. That's one of the hurdles I've had to deal with along the way, people calling it nonfiction. But do they really think that out of my 21 books, that many things happened to me personally? So it is fiction. And I draw on some facts to kind of study the story.
Thank you, Wayne. You have described your very elastic mind as you meld fact and fiction. Your stories also offer lovely portraits of people. Often the plots aren't driven by extraordinary or dramatic events, or even dialogue, as much as they focus microscopically on simple but remarkable human beings lovingly depicted. A blueberry picker, a potato farmer, a village storekeeper, a country school teacher, people who knit or sew or paint to get through a rural snowstorm. Where do your charming portraits come from?
Generally, good question, Suzanne. Generally, I try to take somebody I knew along the way and set them to dance, and dig the old skeletons out of the closet and make them dance. And so, like in my story, my novel, One Indian Summer, I took a combination of two guys for my grandfather there, my father, and a woman, household woman like those, my mother. And so I borrow like that from people. And then once I get in that mindset that particular character has, then I can take it to all extremes I want because I know how that kind of a person thinks. And there's certain old people that may be limited in their knowledge, so you keep them in that frame. And so that might explain a little bit of it. I don't know, Suzanne. as I said, I never had a writing course, but that's the way I do it. I try to find a character that's interesting and put together a group of characters for your story, and that makes it a little easier for me. And I think that may be happening to other people. I don't know, but
Yes, the characters that you create are wonderfully effective and humble, yet resilient. You offer a very admirable portrait of human strength. On the subject of characters, most of your stories deal with the reality still very prevalent in rural Atlantic Canada. People who leave this region for cities and opportunities elsewhere, or leave and then return, or don't leave at all. Each of them dealing with dilemmas and sacrifices that go with those choices. Why, as an author, do you feel the need to document these patterns, the tension between leaving a place and staying attached to it?
yes, I do write about going away. And because I did that as a young man myself, I left here when I was 18 and went to Ontario, where I lived 10 years and come of age in Niagara. But I was always lonesome for the old home place. And so you're never really happy in moving, like trying to move a robin away from his nest to another location. And so, or a salmon from the river for that matter. But so I write about those things, and it's something, I'm a sentimentalist, and it's something sad about going away. I remember my father saying to me when I was leaving for Ontario, he said, "Wayne, it's sad you're leaving, but it'd be a lot sadder if you were content to stay here and stumble." And so you have to make the hard move sometimes. And then, after you're away and you realize how much of the family life you're missing. And so you realize you're not at home in Niagara Falls or St. Catharines. So you come back to the country, which I did, and then back to the land movement in '69. And my life just took on a whole new meaning because I found myself in the city. I was depressed, I was trying to make adjustments, playing golf where I should have been fishing, or, other things that you try to do to make it work. And I worked a factory life too, which was a dismal, dismal way to make a living in those big factories. But so it was an easy call to come back. And I'm writing a story right now. It's called On Top of the World, where, we used to get together in the '70s and have bonfires and drink, and we sang the folk music. And, it was a great time. And I don't think I could have had that kind of life in another foreign land. Does that answer your question at all, Suzanne?
It does, absolutely, Wayne. And your character Mark, especially, who reappears in several of your stories, deals with the very dilemma that you just described in your own life. So I think that, yes, you have expressed the tension very vividly. Wayne, I have several questions from an audience member, Sarah in Trenton. She poses 2 questions, both about the craft of writing, and I wondered if you'd be willing to comment. In the first, she says, "You've been writing for more than 50 years and have tried many different genres, including articles. Do you feel writing articles has helped or hindered your short story development?" And the second question is, what advice do you have for emerging writers who hope to have as many years in the craft as you have had?
Well, I started out writing articles because at that point in my life, I was writing wildlife stories for the outdoor magazines and newspaper articles. And some old magazines here in the Maritimes, like the Atlantic Advocate, I just wanted to be published at that point in my life. I just wanted to have my name on a story and be recognized in the community as a writer. And those stories were nonfiction. I mean, I was drawing on history. My first book was called Currents in the Stream, and it is a collection. It came out in '88. It is a collection of articles I wrote about historic people on the river Miramichi, and we capped it off with 3 short stories at the end. But it was important for me to get published at that time, and I found it wasn't a big move from articles to short stories. I know I have a style that is an essay style, and so I just tell the story. And with fiction, of course, you can elaborate. You can take it as far as you like. You can take it as to creative, magic realism like they do in Latin America. Really to extremes, but I find if you go too far, I mean, the editors don't like it. But yeah, so that was a way of kind of easing into the fiction that I'm writing. And to your second question, what was your second question?
Yes, the second question again was, what advice do you have for emerging writers who hope to have as many years in the craft as you have had?
Well, I would advise them to write every morning when your mind is fresh, to read, and don't read junk, but read the very best of writers. I read Marcel Proust. I read Leo Tolstoy, George Eliot. These are heavyweights. And I'm bored now. I can't read. I'm having trouble getting through Summer of '42 because I find it light. So I think read the best writers you're capable of understanding, and write in the mornings, let it rest, come back later in the day and read it again. Don't hurry to get it published. Sometimes I let a story rest for a month and then I come back and read it. And then I can see my flaws. Because when you're in the story, you don't see these things. You might be repeating a word in a paragraph, or you're repeating yourself somewhere down through the story. And then you see that when you have arrested it. And you're looking at it with a cold eye. So you rewrite it then. You don't have to rewrite the story, but you go through it and copy and paste or delete to make the story work. And fewer words are always better. Less is better. That's an old cliche. And so, that's about all the advice I'd have. I think writers because my writer friends are still writing and we're all in our 70s. And it's a catching thing, it's addicting. It's an addiction. And you're not happy unless you're writing. I remember Sherry Fitch saying one time that when she wasn't writing, she thought there was something wrong with her. She couldn't figure out what it was. Then she sat down to write and everything was right with the world. So you write in the morning and you use up that energy on something creative, and then, then rest it and don't hurry to publish it, because I have sent stories off to publishers and then I reread them and looked it over and I thought, no, this needs more work. So then it's awkward to send the second copy saying, discard the first copy, this is the real one here. And so don't be in a hurry to send it off to a press.
Thank you, Wayne. That's extraordinarily helpful advice for other writers. In closing, I would like to ask if one of the 13 short stories in this collection stands out as a favorite for you. Is it the signature piece, Winter Road, which you place as the final story, as a culmination, perhaps? Or is it another one, and why?
Winter Road has 2 meanings. Everything I write, Suzanne, has 2 meanings. It starts off in the spring of the year, and it goes through till Christmas time, from spring, from youth to old age. So all of those stories in the collection, are working towards old age. In every chapter, the person is a little bit older. And So I use the seasons of the year and the seasons of life, try to give everything a double meaning, like Robert Frost personalized some states of mind, like, I remember he was saying, my sorrow when she's here with me thinks these dark days of autumn rain are beautiful as days can be. So he personalized a state of mind quite often in his poetry. I try to do that a bit. And so I don't know if there's anything else in there. My favorite story in the collection, I guess, maybe would be Class of '59, which I draw on pretty heavily on my old girlfriend there. And, a sentimentalist and first love, and you nurture this love through life, even though everybody went their different directions. He runs into her later on at a school reunion, and he doesn't get a chance to dance with her. And he said, to dance with a lesser woman would only make more cruel that of my first love's indifference. So he selected not to dance with her at all and to live with the memory of the years ago. And I remember being with this woman, Carol, in St. John's, Newfoundland, when we went to a pub there, Greensleeves it was called, on George Street in St. John's. And we had such a good afternoon out there. Both exes had died, and we were back together again. And we sat there and listened to the great music, the Newfoundland music. And the next day, Carol wanted to go back again. I said, no, we're going to leave that the way it was, because it was so perfect. And I think if we go back, we might destroy the meaning and the memory. So we never went back. So I nurture that afternoon as a special time. And I think that stuff is what happens with writing. And you draw on that then for a story later on down the road. This happened one afternoon. And so it's a certain state of mind, a certain feeling that you try to bring to life on the page.
Thank you, Wayne, for this generous and insightful entry into your mind and writing. It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne.